Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for watching this video today. We're going to be talking about chapter 15 in our Business 640 course. And it's going to be dealing with independent demand inventory. And these are the things that we hope to talk about in this chapter as we move forward. And when you think about independent demand inventory, it's really about how you go about defining how supply chain really works. When you think about dealing with goods, the goods availability, when are they needed, where are they needed, and who needs them. And it goes into inventory management, really affects all functions of businesses, including operations, marketing, accounting, information, resources, finance, human resources. It covers the entire gambit. And decisions that is relating to managing inventory certainly is a opportunity that every company can have to improve its control of this inventory, because inventory certainly has a direct cost and certainly ties up a lot of capital. So beginning over on page number 370 is where we're beginning chapter 15 today. And there's many different technologies that certainly being used to manage inventory. One of those is being barcoding, which is what you see a lot as you have done your shopping here recently. Barcoding is not only used in the manufacturing process, but in service process, in retail process, even in the medical profession as well. And barcoding really enables that point of sale that's being happening, so that that data can be collected when that point of sale data is then used. And they certainly use radio frequency or RFID as well to track the movement of goods and people. But equally important in some of these barcodes, if you think about it, when you go pay at the cash register and you're using your debit or credit card, it also has a magnetic strip that they're using. But it's not only comparing their inventory stock and replacing their automatic reordering and distribution, but equally important, equally important is looking at the consumer. What are the buying habits of the consumer? What are they buying by geographic location or time of year, seasonal factors, so they can adjust inventories appropriately. And inventory is really about a stock of material that's being used or that's being available for sale to satisfy a customer's demands or the customer needs. And one of the definitions that was discussed in our textbook when it comes to inventory really is simplistically a stock of material. Now, it certainly can be defined many different ways, and every business looks at inventory differently, but generically, it is something that inventory is needed in the productions of goods and components for today's consumers. And when you think about inventory stocks, how this whole process comes about, this figure 15.1 on page 371 really simplistically reflects the materials flow process from the time the raw materials comes into the production process, at what point that those raw materials do come into that process, and when they leave that as finished goods and eventually to the consumers. So you see inventory stocks are located certainly at various levels throughout a production process. It is really about the flow of that material and how it connects one piece of the manufacturing or the service process to another. This figure 15.2 was an analogy that it's a pretty good analogy when you think about the concepts and flows of inventory and the stocks. And in this particular figure, what it's really trying to get us to realize is that the tank itself it is corresponding to or reflecting of an overall company inventory level. And the rate of flow that's coming into the tank is really about the supply rate of that inventory coming into the inventory level or the water tank. And then you have this demand rate, which is what's going out of the inventory level. And we increase the supply rate to maintain the inventory level that's going to match the demand rate to ensure that we never get to a point where we deplete our entire inventory. As you know, depletion of one's entire inventory certainly can lead to stockouts, can lead to our consumers or customers going to another business so that they can get these goods and services that they want. And again, you see this over on page 372 in figure 14.2 and also in figure 15.3 at the bottom of that page. It's just another good example that explains this concept. So over on page 373, let's talk about the purpose of inventory. One of the main things of the purpose of inventory is to protect against the uncertainty that comes into each and every one of our organizations on a continuous basis. We never know exactly what the changes that's going to occur from day to day. In some cases, because of all the internal and external factors that may be influencing our particular organizations. And I apologize for this flicking of the screen, but my battery was about to go dead, so I wanted to make sure I get it charged before it did. So with that, it's really about protecting for uncertainties. You certainly want to have a safety stock, which is that inventory that should be maintained by every organization to protect those against uncertainty. And the real key is understanding how much of that safety stock I need to keep, because stock that's sitting on the shelf considered as inventory certainly has a direct line cost, and it's tied up capital that could be used certainly for something else. So maintaining that at the appropriate levels is very, very paramount. And that's looking at the safety stock. We talk about demand, supply, and lead times and the schedule changes to ensure that that work in process has the inventories it needs to allow the work or the manufacturing process to continually flow. And we certainly want to do that, take advantage of the economies of scale and scope to maintain that safety stock. Another purpose of inventory is to allow economic production and purchase, or in other words, to continually to allow the production to continue with minimal to no disruptions, to allow that manufacturing process to continue so that we can constantly and continuously meet the cycle inventory that what comes in goes out is being effectively utilized, that we're meeting the customers, again, demands and what they are wanting us to provide to them. And if you recall from chapter 7, we talked about the lean concepts and that most firms are aggressively working to minimize or to reduce the setup times and costs by altering the product or the process to ensure that the inventories are at the appropriate level, again, to take advantage of the economies of scope while we're meeting the demands of our customers. The next one, number 3, bullet here is to cover anticipated changes in the demand and supply as we can anticipate what our inventory needs may be or what we need to change or when we need to change it based on the price or availability of raw material, the ever-changing governmental and economic conditions that we find ourselves in. Certainly the political instability in some foreign countries that may have an impact to our availabilities of raw materials. And in some cases, because of that, we'll go into stockpiling these raw materials. And again, that's very expensive because it ties up inventory. But equally important, this anticipation of inventory is, let's say, for instance, we talked about last week about forecasting and how important it is to ensure that your forecast, and some of our organizations need to have the seasonality factors associated with that over the different seasons. Another one was to provide for transient. In other words, how do we move the inventory from one point to another point in the supply chain, which is called the pipeline inventory, or the transit inventory that we see over on page 374. Then continuing on page 374, we get into this concept. It's called the cost of the inventory. And there's certainly several different costs that you want to be concerned with, because again, it does have a direct economic impact to any organization. And there's several costs that we want to talk about. The first one being the item cost, and that is the cost of buying or producing the individual component or the associated with our inventory. Sorry about that. Let me come back. Okay, there we go. Something, I lost my place here. So when we talk about the cost of item cost, you're talking about the inventory cost, and that is how you go about producing the individual inventory items, and that is typically expressed as a cost per unit or a stock keeping unit, SKU. And when you're doing that, can you reduce that item cost by multiplying the quantities or that's going to be procured or produced? In other words, economies of scale. The next one deals with ordering or setup cost, and this is the cost that's incurred when you order a lot or a batch of items, and generally that does not depend on the size that's going to be ordered. It is typically assigned to the entire batch. So a good example here would be, let's say that the ordering or the setup cost are synonymous with each other, that regardless of the setup, it's going to cost me the same whether I'm making a batch of 10,000 watches or whether I'm making a batch of 1,000,000 watches. That setup cost to initially make the first watch, again, whether I make 100,000 or 1,000,000, that setup cost is going to be the same. So it really does not depend on the lot size that's going to be ordered in some examples. That's an example of a ordering or setup cost. And again, those two terms are used synonymously. The next one deals with the cost, the carrying or holding cost, carrying cost or holding cost. And this is the carrying or holding cost that's really about keeping inventory over a period of time. And when you keep inventory over a period of time, you can imagine that there is a cost associated with that. And here we see as an example the cost of capital, the cost of storage, and the cost of obsolescence is certainly a part of that you always have to consider anytime you're carrying or holding inventory that has a direct bottom line to your profit margin. In this example of the average 35% of stock keeping unit SKU cost per year, and that 35% is broken down over those three different varying costs. And you see that discussion over on page 374 and 375. Then the last cost of inventory deals with the stock out cost. And that really reflects the economic consequences of running out of stock. This is where our customers really are not happy with us when they come to our place of business or they go to online shopping if we're doing that. And or if we have a service that we're providing and we're not able to meet their needs. And our items may be on back order for the customer. which, as you know, in today's customer-driven market, customers now at a point where they demand it and they want it yesterday, and they're not really interested in listening to the reasons why. There's certainly ways in which you can overcome that to maintain your loyal customers, and one of those certainly is offer some incentives, offer a discount, or tie some complimentary good to it to ensure that they come back to you. But again, even that is a cost. Then the second component of the stock out cost is the sales lost if the items cannot be found, especially if a consumer says, I don't want to wait and I want to have it today. And if I can't buy it from you, then I'll just go to one of your competitors. So that's the 4 different costs of inventory on 374, 375. Here's that different distribution of the carrying costs we talked about a few moments ago, the 35%, and how typically how the cost is associated while having inventory. Or another way of looking at that is out of every dollar, 35 cents is tied up in holding on to inventory. So you can imagine how expensive that is and how forecasting using great models in order to maintain your inventory at the appropriate level, is absolutely paramount. Okay, so let's move on. So there's different types of demand over on page 376, 377. And one of the crucial distinctions when you think about inventory management is the independent or dependent type of demand. And as our textbook go on to say, independent demand is influenced by the market conditions, which is outside the control of the firm. Therefore, the independent demand for any inventory items or finished goods or spare parts usually is the independent. And this is where great forecasting models absolutely comes into play. Then we have the dependent demand, where dependent demand items that have demand that is related to one another and is not independently determined by the market. Demand is known, and you can use that to calculate what that cost is going to be instead of using forecasting models. So these demand patterns certainly calls for different approaches when you come to inventory demand. And as an example, when you're looking at independent demand, you're looking at a replenishment philosophy, which is a philosophy which is replenishing all the material that you need so that you always have the material to produce the products. You always have that material on hand. So with that, you never have to be concerned about inventory running out. As soon as the inventory levels start to drop, an order is automatically triggered and more material is sent to replenish what is being used. Then the second the piece of this is the dependent demand, which is a requirements philosophy. And this is really a philosophy that is not based on the replenishment philosophy, but based on use. So as a stock order is being used, additional inventory is not being ordered automatically like it is in a replenishment. Once it gets down to a set level, then and only then will that order be replenished. And in some cases, what I'm accustomed to is we have a stock on hand. We always have a minimum. When I was at the power plant, we always had a minimum number of components that was on hand. And once they got down below a certain minimal level, then it would automatically kick in. And some of those, the on-hand level was higher than others based on usage. And so for what I was accustomed to, we were kind of using a blended approach. So as you can imagine, that all parts are not created equal when you come to operating a power plant, where some components that you cannot afford not to have the right inventory levels on hand. Could be based on use, could be based on the criticality to maintaining the plant and ensuring that the plant operates safely. So we kind of used a blended approach in this particular type of inventory that I was accustomed to. And yours may be very similar, or yours may be really dominant one way or the other. This figure 15.4 on page 377 just goes into those two different type of independent and dependent demand type of strategies, where they use the term lumpy, and that's really a interesting term, but it really shows that when I get to a preset level, then I'm going to reorder, and in some cases that level may get down to zero. Where here, as soon as I drop my inventory, I start reordering. As you can imagine, depending on the type of business that you're in, one may be better than the other. Some components, again, not all components are created equal. You may have some that this strategy is perfectly fine. You may have others where this strategy is fine, as I gave you my example from the power plant. But we kind of use a blended approach of both. So the economic order quantity over on page 377, 78, 79 really goes into, it's gaining more industry-wide use. It's used for these independent demand items, and it's really trying to determine what's going to be the best order quantity queue that minimize the total cost of managing inventory. And it's got to be calculated for each one of these stock keeping units, SKUs. It is widely used and somewhat robust. And this really model is based on the several assumptions that you see at the bottom of page 377. These are these assumptions. The demand rate is the constant, recurring, and known. The lead time is constant and known. Your business does not allow any stock outs. Items or materials or order are produced in a lot or batch, and the lot is placed in the inventory at all times. The unit item cost is constant, and no discounts given for large purposes. The carrying cost is linear to the average inventory level, and the order or setup cost for each lot is fixed, and it's independent of the number that's in that lot. In other words, it doesn't matter whether I'm making one watch, 1,000 watch, 10,000 watches, or 1,000,000 watches. My fixed cost is going to be to set up my manufacturing process will remain the same. And finally, it's a single item without any interactions with other inventory associated with that. So, and when you go about choosing the lot size, obviously there's got to be a trade-off between the ordering frequency and the inventory level. As we indicate here, small lots will lead to frequent reorders, but a low average inventory, which will relate to a lower average inventory. But if the order sizes are larger, then the order frequency will decrease, but more inventory will be carried. So let me rephrase that. So we have the EOQ lot size. We talk about the frequent orders and fewer orders. Either we're going to order in smaller lot sizes or larger lot sizes. And we do smaller, that leads to lower average inventory level, but we have higher total ordering costs, but yet lower total holding costs because we have less inventory in stock, or we're carrying less inventory. But depending on how quick we need that order to meet the needs of our customers or our production capabilities, some vendors will charge a premium price to meet your demands, your emergent demands. So you want to find that balance where the fewer orders, you order larger, you order less, so your total ordering cost is lower, but now my carrying or holding cost is higher because I have more inventory now in my warehouse. So that's the difference between the two. And the real goal is trying to determine mathematically at what point should my average inventory be? How much should I have on hand? What's going to be the order interval? And I'm looking at all that again to ensure that I have no stock outs. I'm meeting the demands of my production capabilities to maximize that process while I'm meeting the overall demands of my customers. But I want to do this at the least cost possible to the organization, because typically, as you know, manufacturing costs at times is very hard to predict, but it's one of those that certainly is a pass-through cost to the consumer, and the consumers want high quality products. But as a consumer, I want it at the least cost possible, and I'm quite confident that you do as well. So this is just a graphical example of figure 15.5 on page 378. Now, when you get into the actual calculation, how do I go about determining what it's going to be? This is also on page 378. These terms are key. You certainly would want to make sure that you understand when you're doing a EOQ model, what are these terms and what do they mean to you? As you can see, D as in Delta is the demand rate units per year. S or Sierra is the cost per order placed, or the setup cost, which is in dollars per order. And this is where making sure that your unit of measurement is paramount, and that you're using the same unit of measurement, and that's clearly annotated in your problem so you don't get lost per se. C as in Charlie is the unit cost per unit. I as in India is the carrying rate, a percent value per year, and you will typically find I in the decimal equivalent. If it's 30% is the carrying rate, when you're going to go do your calculations, you should be using the decimal equivalent of 0.30. Do not calculate it just by 30, because your values will not work. And if you do that, when you see the astronomical cost, that should be an immediate flag that maybe the math was wrong. So carrying rate or percentage is typically, you will see that when the problem may say 30%, but now you have the knowledge, now that you know that carrying percentage should be a decimal equivalent. Then you have Q, Quebec is the lot size in unit, and TC or Tango Charlie is the total ordering cost plus the carrying cost of dollars per year. And as we've already indicated, the ordering cost is the setup cost, and the carrying rate is also the holding rate, and we discussed that again back over on page 374, 375. So when you're thinking about the annual ordering cost, how do I take all this information and turn it into a algebraic equation that we see here in our textbook? One of the first things we're talking about deal with the ordering cost per year. Again, that's the cost per order times the orders per year, which you see it again in the cost per order times the demand rate divided by Q being the lot size. And then you have the carrying cost per year, which is the annual carrying rate times the unit cost times the average inventory level. And you see the algebraic notation there of lowercase I C times Q divided by 2. Then we have the total annual cost, TC, which is the ordering cost plus the carrying cost, which is the combination of those two algebraic equations. And please do not forget that, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally will not be happy with you if you are not familiar with your algebraic order of operations and how that works. So she's still calling your name. So make sure you adhere to the correct order of operations. Now, you can see this implies this is multiplication. And sometimes I will come in here, if I'm unsure, I will come in here and do this. I will add quote or a parentheses just to clarify within myself what I need to do from please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So whatever you need to do that you can see it that best works for you, I would encourage you to do that, because without anything in between, like total cost TC, that is implied multiplication. But if it's been a while since I did algebra, certainly do that. You're not changing the equation. The equation still remains true. But I did add the notation in there so I can clearly see what needs to be done. Okay, so this example, figure 15.6 on page 373, really is looking at the total cost, showing the carrying and ordering cost, and how the ordering cost and the carrying cost offset one another. While one decreases, the other one increases, because this trade-off of the function of the total cost has minimum. So what this is really reflecting over on page 379 is this relationship of these equations here, as we're trying to find what's the correct number of Q that's going to minimize our cost. As we move down this timeline, time typically is on the x-axis. What's going to be our minimal cost, our annual cost per year, total cost, that is going to make sure I meet all the objectives of minimizing my inventory, maximizing my production, while minimizing my exposure to the company, while maximizing my profit to our customers, while minimizing their costs. So it's really about what's going to be the best number of Q that I could have here that's going to meet all those objectives. So if you look at the total cost, this is this line here. As the more inventory that I have, which is my carrying cost, that's my holding cost, that indicates I have more inventory. The more inventory that I have, my carrying cost is increasing, which is affecting my overall total cost, because this is my setup cost or my ordering cost, which is my ordering or setup cost here. This is my carrying cost algebraic equation, which is this line here. So this is that as my carrying cost increases, I have more inventory on hand. My ordering cost is decreasing because I'm placing less orders. So the key here is to find where's this point where this intersects that's going to minimize that cost to me as a company. So that's a graphical representation. Putting all this together, we have this EOQ model, which is equation 15.2 on page 379. So what we're trying to find here is to solve this entire equation that you see on page 379, to get it through using calculus to get to this end result here of isolating Q to try to determine what's going to be the best value of Q here that's going to minimize my total cost, which again is my carrying cost plus my ordering cost. So all of that to get down to this equation 15.2 on page 379. And this 15.2 equation is the classic economic order quantity that minimizes the cost of managing an item in inventory. That's what it's all about. So you have this equation. They give us this great example on page 379 and page 380. I would encourage you to feel comfortable in understanding the terms and how that is working, because this is a model that certainly you could use throughout the remainder of your working career. And it really gives you a ballpark figure, as long as the assumptions that we talked about back over on page 377 are still prevalent. Somewhat accurate as long as those assumptions remain the same. So reading that example on page 379, 380, good information to read. Here's another example of a using the EOQ formula to determine how many cases that I need per year. And you can see the information that's provided in this particular example where I've got my demand, I've got my interest, I've got my per unit cost per order, and I've got my unit cost per order as well. And it's all weeks per year, order per case. So you can see we have our EOQ formula. Q equals 2 times S times V divided by I times C, taking the square root of that. And you again, that's formula that you see figure 15.2 on page 379. So in doing the calculations, it's 22.8 cases per order. So how did we do some of this? So if we look at the $12, which is the value of S, how do we come up with 520 cases, which is my demand? Well, if I have 10 cases per week times 52 weeks a year, that gives me 520 cases demand per year. This is where making sure that you keep your unit of measurements consistent throughout your calculations will ensure that you come up with a very good answer. Then we have, again, the I is in 30% per year, which is our carry-in rate or our interest rate to carry that inventory. And as we can see here, we're using the decimal equivalent of 0.3 times 22.8, which was our EOQ, which gives us $547.28 per year total cost. Now, if I was to take that as an example and just said instead of 22.8, I used 23 cases, redid my calculations instead of 22.8, I would insert 23. That would be 547.30. And think about it from this standpoint. This is actually cheaper to go ahead and order the 2/10 of a case and have just a little bit excess inventory because of the total cost associated with it. And if you think about it from the standpoint that if I was shipping this stuff to you, then that cost for that truck, that freight, that plane, that boat, whether I'm taking 23 cases or 23 and a portion of a case, I'm still probably paying the same amount for that transport time. So it probably, in this example, would be good just to go ahead and roll it on up if you got the space and it doesn't cost you any more, as an example. But this is how you could use the EOQ model to make a management decision on how much do I need. Here's the graphical representation of that, and that you can see around 21, 22, 23, 24 cases, my total inventory cost is flat line. So anywhere within that range, my total cost is going to remain the same. But obviously, the more I order, the more cost I'm going to incur because my demand may not be there and I have more inventory that I'm carrying. Again, carrying cost is inventory cost. Okay, so that's another example that goes along with the example on page 379, 378. So let's talk about the continuous review system where you see over on page 381. And this is really about managing inventory and those decisions about when do I need to reorder stock based on the total inventory that I have on hand, plus, key point here, the total of inventory that I have on hand, plus the inventory that is on order. So that's really about reordering stock. And that total of on-hand inventory and on-order inventory is called the stock position. And in this continuous review system, which is also known as a fixed order quantity system or the Q system, is really about maintaining the stock and monitoring that stock after each transaction or after each thing is removed from stock on a continuous basis, so that the management system is robust enough to know when a decision needs to be made to refill that particular order. And this graph here, which is at the bottom of page 381, figure 15.7, really is about the stock position drops as inventory is used to fulfill a irregular demand until it reaches the reorder point. And that reorder point, R, is at the point where once my inventory is being used up, I hit my reorder point, R. That may be my minimal level, that as my demand still continues, my order now is being generated through the system, and now I'm dealing with this lead time from the time I place the order till my stock is replenished and I'm back above my reorder or my minimal level. And hopefully our system is smart enough and that we have forecasted well enough that when we're having this level of usage, that in conjunction with our lead time, we never get down here where we've got stock out, where we cannot continue our production process or continue to operate our plants, right, in order to continue to meet our customers in their demands. Or I know some of you are in the medical profession, so think about it from the standpoint that if I'm a pharmacist, and that I get down to a minimum order, a particular type of prescription medication that is needed. We know medication is there to help people get better. Pharmacy never wants to get down here where they cannot fulfill that prescription. Again, all medication is not the same. All sicknesses are not the same, but you don't want to get to a point where you are out of stock. And this is what this continuous review system really is all about. So the R stands for the reorder point, and it's an order where the amount of Q is going to be replaced so that that cycle of usage, as it continues, we can reorder, but yet have enough inventory on stock to ensure we don't get to a stock out so that we can continue. And again, this lead time includes from the time you place the order to give the vendor the time to get his or her or that company's raw material, to get that raw material ordered to their facility, get the products made, get it tested, get it qualified in some cases, get it tested, and then get it shipped out to you so that you can have your receipt inspections and doing all the receipt management stuff that you do to replace it in your stock to make it available for reissuance. So that's what the reorder point is all about. And this value of R, which is over on page 383, is really about what's going to be the stock out probability, which is commonly referred to R. And to estimate this R at the bottom of page 382, we need to know what the service level is, which is the percentage of the customer demand that's satisfied from inventory. And the service level is also called the fill rate. So 100% service level means that all customer demand is satisfied from inventory, but we're going to see an example here shortly that that's probably just about impossible to achieve. So the stock out percentage is what you have out of stock out is equal to 100 minus the service level. So let's use an example. Let's say that our service level for a batch of pens is 75%. So I want to know what my stock out percentage is. So if my service level is 75%, and I know that that is calculated the stock out percentage is calculated by saying 100% minus the service level. And if our service level is 75%, then we have a stock out percentage of 25%. Again, that discussion is over here at the bottom of page 382. Over on page 383, there's several ways that they list to express service level. Service level is the probability that all orders are filled from stock during the replenishment time. Service level is also a percentage of the demand filled from stock during a particular time, and they indicate usually within a year. And service level is a percentage of the time that the stock has on hand. So as the inventory is being depleted, eventually the inventory management system must go out and place an order. And we want to do that as quickly as we possibly can to minimize our costs to prevent a stock out, but balancing all the replenishment times with the demand. So you see figure, this equation 15.3, the order point R equals M plus S, which is the mean demand during lead time plus the safety stock. You see that at the bottom of page 383, where the reorder point is independent of EOQ, where the EOQ tells us how much to order. The reorder point tells us when do we need to reorder. So you see that over on the bottom of page 383. Also at the bottom of 383, we have this term called safety stock, where that safety stock is being expressed by S equals Z times the standard deviation, or the safety factor, Z times the standard deviation of the demand during lead time. And that service level also, we just talked about how that can be fulfilled as well. And figure 15 table 15.1 on page 384 gives us the nominal percentages of Z in the particular service level in the stock out percentage already calculated. So this is the probability distribution, figure 15.8 at the top of 383, which kind of gives us a graphical representation of the stock out probability and the service level probability with this safety factor. And if that Z factor, if you remember from your statistics days on the normal distribution curve, that's really the same concept. Okay, so let's talk about the, let me back up, I'm sorry. Page 384, 385, again, gives us another good example that reinforces this concept. So moving on to page 386, we go into this concept called the periodic review system, which is also known as the fixed order interval system, or the fixed order period system, or the P as in Papa system, where the target level is set to cover the demand until the next periodic review plus the delivery time. So this P system really is somewhat different than the Q system in several ways. At the bottom of page 386, where we see that it does not have a reorder point, but instead has a target inventory. It does not have an economic order quantity, since the order quantity may vary according to the demand. And in the P system, the order quantity or the order interval is fixed, whereas in the Q system, the order can be placed when the inventory is needed. So a little bit of difference between a P and a Q system. Here's a graphical representation of that discussion, figure 15.9, that illustrates what we just said in verbiage. So even with this, you have an algebraic equation as well, where here we're substituting for Q. Here in Q, now we're placing in the economic order quantity here and doing the distributives multiplications of algebra. We see that the D's cancel each other out. D divided by D equals 1. Anything by itself equals 1, so that goes away. the D times IC equals ICD, which is where that came from. So we replaced the Q, we took the value of the economic order point now and inserted that into this formula, which gives us the new equation 15.4 here at page 387. Then we have the target inventory level at the equation 15.5 here at the bottom of 387 as well, where you have the interval time of P, which we have the lead time of L. So the interval of P plus the lead time of L gives us the M prime, and the safety stock gives us the S prime, which tells us what's going to be the target level inventory. And at the top of page 388, they also give us a safety stock where we have again the Z factor, or this time we're using S prime equals Z over standard deviation prime, with the standard deviation of the demand, which is P plus L again, which is the periodic review plus the lead time. And you see that at the top of page 388. And they also give us again another example here on page 388 that reinforces those concepts as well. Okay, moving on. How do we use this in practice over on page 389? That we see. That we see here. So it's really about the P system, and orders must be placed at specific levels or specific intervals, where the Q system is based on the demand because those items are typically expensive, where the P systems are typically inexpensive. P system may require more safety stock than the Q, where P is really monitoring, both of them has a cost. P is monitoring the safety stock, and Q is monitoring the expensive items. And you see that discussion in the center of page 389. Here's a service levels inventory figure 15.10 at the bottom of page 390, which kind of, this figure shows the increase in level of inventory required to achieve our higher service level. So this is just a graphical representation of, if I want to increase my service level, then my average inventory level has got to increase as well, which that makes logical sense. This way I'm sure I've got more inventory. Don't have to worry about stock outs. But as you can imagine, again, inventory cost, and that's a direct cost to the bottom line of every organization. And you see that again on page 390. Then we have this term called, I'm sorry, let me back up. This is the P and Q systems at home. This is just a example of how I could interrelate both of these systems, and I'll leave that for your reading enjoyment. Then we have this vendor manual inventory system, which is looking at supply chain management that passes some of the responsibility for managing its inventory or stocks to its vendors. It gets the vendors to agree to maintaining some of our inventory, especially when our demand may not be as high, may be done through contractual agreements and obligations, so that they could take some of the risk associated with maintaining inventory, which is a win-win for us as an organization, but equally important, a win for them. It's really about how can we share the cost of maintaining that inventory so that both of us could be successful in our specific industry segment. But you see that on 391, 392. Then we get into this concept of 392 of ABC classification of inventory. This is the analysis of the 80-20 rule. And this is really trying to describe that, like individuals in a economy, is that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the workforce. Well, in this particular example, 80% of the inventory is providing 20% of the income. Excuse me, 20% of the income. I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. This is a classic example where most of the inventory value is measured by dollars. And because of that, what this is indicating is that um, most of the sales comes from 20% of what we sell. 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of what we sell. So what this is saying is that this 80-20 rule when it comes to inventory is that a organization's inventory typically contains about 20% of the items it ties up 80% of its dollar usage. And we see that at the bottom of page 392, figure 15.4, just gives you an example of that particular inventory on this, where these 10 items. This gives you a graphical representation of that. So most of the dollar usage in inventory, 80%, is being closely controlled by 20% of what's in your inventory. And as a result of that, this is where they use a classification of A, B, and C based on usage. And based on that usage is where they're going to monitor the inventory cost. And if 80% of the inventory is controlled by the A items of 20%, so as you can imagine, if this is where 80% of my dollars is tied up at, the ones that I'm going to monitor the most is going to be A items. The least will be C items, because that have the least financial impact to me. So that's really what the ABC classification of inventory is really all about. And this again gives you that graphical representation at the bottom of page 15.4, page 392. And this just gives you the ABC chart of that table 15.4 in graphical format. So you can see that item number 3 and item number 6 are classified as A and takes up the greatest percentage of use, but yet as a result of that has the greatest percentage of total dollar usage as well. That's just a graphical representation. So that concludes chapter 15. Thank you so much for watching this video.